"Get out or I'll call the police." That's what my son said to me. Not a stranger, not a tenant, my own son. And in that moment, I realized I was no longer a mother. I was just an old woman with nowhere left to belong. My name is Martha. I'm 68. I used to believe that if you gave everything to your family, they would never forget you. That love, once planted, would always grow back. I was wrong. 7 years ago, my husband George passed away. After a long battle with cancer, the house we built together, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck, suddenly became too quiet, too empty. I thought about selling it, but I couldn't. Every corner echoed with memories. Then one day, my son David called and said, "Mom, why don't you come live with us? You shouldn't be alone at your age." I didn't even hesitate. I packed my things, locked the front door, and walked into what I believed would be the next warm chapter of my life. At first, I told myself everything was fine. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, wasn't exactly welcoming, but maybe she just needed time. David worked a lot, but that was normal. And the baby, my sweet granddaughter, was the light of my days. But gradually I started noticing things. The way Sarah would sigh when I entered the kitchen. The way David stopped asking about my day. The silence at the dinner table. I began shrinking into corners, careful not to take up space. Then came the day that broke something inside me. There was a small party at the house. David's coworkers were over. I baked oatmeal cookies, George's favorite, and carried them into the living room. I stood quietly at the edge of the group, tray in hand. One man asked David, "Is that your mom?" David chuckled and said, "Oh, she just stays here." They laughed, and I stood there, smiling politely. But inside, I shattered. She just stays here. Not my mom, not Martha, just a thing, a presence, a ghost. Later that week, I was cleaning the kitchen and accidentally dropped a glass. It slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. The sound was sharp, like a crack through ice. David stormed down the stairs, his voice like thunder. "Are you serious, Mom? Again? This is not your house to break. You need to know your place." I froze, hands still shaking. Then he did something I never thought he would. He pulled out his phone. "Get out or I'll call the police. I swear to God." I didn't say a word. I didn't cry. I just looked at him. This man I carried in my belly for 9 months. The boy I raised through flu and fever, school and heartbreak. And I didn't recognize him anymore. He wasn't my son. He was someone who wanted me gone. I walked back to my room. The glass still lay broken on the kitchen floor. And so was I. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed for hours, staring at the wall. Not sleeping, not thinking, just breathing. Trying to remember the last time someone in this house asked me how I was doing. And for the first time in my life, I whispered to myself, maybe I don't belong anywhere anymore. After that night, I didn't speak much anymore. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted to protest, but because I didn't know if anyone wanted to hear my voice. I began waking up earlier than everyone else. I would clean the kitchen, fold the laundry, water the plants, all before 7 a.m. I made sure to move quietly, so my footsteps wouldn't disturb Sarah. I knew she hated hearing me walk down the hallway. I ate my meals in the kitchen, standing by the sink. I stopped sitting at the dinner table. Nobody noticed. David was always on his laptop. Sarah was always on her phone. My granddaughter was handed a tablet, and I disappeared. But the worst part wasn't their silence. It was mine. Inside, I started believing that maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was too old, too slow, too sensitive. Maybe I had overstayed my welcome. I remember one morning I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were tired, her shoulders slouched, her voice, when she finally spoke, cracked like broken porcelain. I whispered, "What happened to you?" And then came the memories of who I used to be. I remembered George's hands, rough from building the porch with me in our first home. I remembered scraping every penny so David could go to college. I remembered selling my jewelry to pay for his wedding because he was short on money. I gave and gave and gave, and now I was here, standing in a stranger's mirror, wondering if I had ever mattered. That afternoon, I sat alone on the porch swing, the same one George built for me as an anniversary gift. It had been moved to the back corner of the yard, away from everyone's view, just like me. I watched the wind move the trees. I watched Sarah pull into the driveway, not glancing my way. And then something strange happened. A memory came back, vivid, painful, clear. The day George and I signed the deed to our house. His smile, his voice. "This house will always be ours, no matter what." My eyes widened. The papers, the ownership. I never changed it. David didn't know. He thought it was his now, just because I moved in. But the truth was, the house still legally belonged to me. For a moment, I felt a spark inside, faint but real. Not anger, not revenge, dignity. And I realized something. If I kept waiting for them to see me, I'd disappear forever. If I didn't claim space for myself now, there would be nothing left of me to save. So that night, I opened the bottom drawer of my old desk. There, under some tax papers and photo albums, was the document, the house deed, my name, Martha Eleanor Lewis, still the legal owner. I held it like a lifeline. Because that's what it was, and for the first time in months, I stood up straighter. Because maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a fight I never knew I still had in me. The deed stayed hidden beneath my mattress for the next few days, but it might as well have been tattooed on my hands. Every time I cleaned the hallway, poured a cup of tea, or passed David in the kitchen, I felt its presence, like a heartbeat beneath the floorboards. I started moving differently, not louder, just more present. I stopped tiptoeing. I brewed coffee in the morning without trying to muffle the kettle. I sat at the dining table again, even if no one talked to me. When Sarah sighed or rolled her eyes, I didn't flinch anymore. I wasn't angry. I was remembering who I used to be. One afternoon, I walked past the bookshelf in the living room and saw the old family photo. David at 10, me with flour on my shirt, George holding up a burned cake we laughed about for years. It made my throat tighten, not from sadness, from clarity. I hadn't always been this quiet woman, afraid of her own footsteps. I used to matter, and I still did. Then came Thursday. Sarah had left early for work. I was folding towels in the kitchen when David walked in, carrying a folder. He placed it gently on the counter in front of me, like it was nothing. "Hey, Mom, got a minute?" I nodded. He opened the folder and slid a stack of documents toward me. "I just need you to sign these." I glanced down. It took me less than 3 seconds to understand. Property transfer, mortgage updates, signatures. It was about the house. "What is this?" I asked, though I already knew. David gave a casual smile, like this was all perfectly normal. "Just some paperwork. It's easier if everything's under my name. Makes refinancing simpler. You wouldn't have to worry about anything." I stared at him. My fingers brushed the pen he'd placed on top of the papers. "You want me to sign the house over to you?" I asked softly. "It's just logical, Mom." I mean, we all live here. You don't need that kind of stress. He said it with such ease, like it was a favor to me, like he was helping. And that's when I saw it. Not malice, not cruelty, entitlement. The kind that grows when someone forgets how much they've been given. I looked at the papers again, then back at David, and slowly, deliberately, I pushed the pen aside. No, he blinked. What do you mean, no? I mean, I won't sign this. His mouth tightened. Why not? This is for the family, for us. I stood straighter. You want to talk about family? Let's talk. I gave birth to you. I raised you. I worked night shifts while your father worked 2 jobs. We skipped vacations, sold jewelry, gave up everything so you could go to college, so you could have this life. And now you want me to sign over the last thing your father and I built together? The only thing that still has his name written in the walls? David didn't say anything. His jaw clenched. I stepped closer. I gave you life. That's enough. You don't get my house. You don't get my memories. And you sure as hell don't get to decide when I've outlived my use. Silence. Thick, heavy silence. David gathered the papers back into the folder without another word and walked out. I heard the office door shut a little harder than usual. I stood alone in the kitchen, heart pounding. Not from fear, but from something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Power. Not the loud, angry kind. The quiet kind that comes when you finally say, enough. That night I sat on the old wooden bench in the backyard. The stars were faint, the air cool. I closed my eyes and imagined George beside me. His warm arm across my shoulders, his voice low and steady. You did good today, Martha. I smiled to myself, because for the first time in years, I hadn't apologized for existing. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day where the sky was just gray enough to feel like something was about to break. I was in the kitchen, peeling apples for a pie I wasn't sure anyone would eat, when the landline rang. An odd thing, it barely rang anymore. I wiped my hands and picked it up. Hello, Mrs. Martha Lewis. Speaking. This is Alan Grant, with United First Bank. I'm calling regarding the recent refinancing request on the property at 108 Merton Street. My heart skipped. I'm sorry, refinancing? Yes, ma'am. The paperwork we received lists you as primary owner, co-signed with David Lewis. We just need to confirm a few final details. I swallowed. I never signed anything. A pause, a too long pause. The documents include a signature under your name, ma'am. My chest tightened. My fingers began to tremble. I asked him to email the documents. My breath held until the file opened on the screen. There it was, my name, my signature, on something I had never seen. I felt dizzy, like the floor beneath me had shifted. I sat down, my ears rang. He forged it. David forged my name. I stared at the screen. The betrayal wasn't loud, it was quiet, cold, clinical. He hadn't just lied, he had erased me. The man I carried in my womb for 9 months. The boy I sat up with through fevers, bullies, heartbreak. The son I gave my youth, my body, my life for, had turned me into a legal obstacle. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply shut the laptop and waited for him to come home. Hours later, I heard the door. David's usual routine, keys on the counter, shoes by the stairs. I walked into the living room holding the printed documents. We need to talk. He turned. His face didn't register guilt, just irritation. I held out the paper. What is this? He glanced at it, then shrugged. You wouldn't sign. I didn't have a choice. So you forged my signature? He raised a brow. It's not a big deal, Mom. I had to get things moving. You live here. It's for the family. For the family. How easily he used those words, like a shield to justify theft. You didn't even ask. You would have said no, he snapped. You're being difficult. I took a deep breath, calm, controlled. No, David, I'm being aware. I finally see what you are. His jaw clenched. This house needs to be secured under my name. You're too old to manage it, and Sarah's pregnant again. That hit harder than I expected. Sarah was pregnant. No one had told me, not a word. I was no longer just unwanted. I was irrelevant. You really want me gone, don't you? He didn't answer. The next morning, I found an envelope on the floor outside my door. No return address, no signature. I opened it with shaking hands. You have 7 days to vacate the property. If not, I will pursue legal removal on grounds of trespassing. No, Mom, no please, just a deadline. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding the letter like it might catch fire. But the pain was no longer raw. It had become something else. Clarity, finality, freedom. I looked around the room, the same room I had folded his baby clothes in. The walls where I'd once hung family photos. It wasn't a home anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. I stood up and opened the closet, pulled out a suitcase. Not the big one. I wouldn't need much, just the essentials. The deed, my ID, a notebook of memories, a picture of George. I moved slowly, carefully, almost peacefully. I was no longer packing out of fear. I was packing with purpose. Before the sun rose the next morning, I stepped out of the house without a sound. I didn't look back. Because I wasn't leaving in shame, I was reclaiming my life. The morning air was sharp and clean. A breeze rolled through the street like a quiet promise. You're not done yet. I stepped outside with nothing but a suitcase and my handbag. No one saw me leave. The house behind me, my house, stood tall and still. I didn't glance back. I didn't need to. I had already buried it the night before. I walked down the sidewalk, passing familiar trees, cracks in the pavement I used to trip over, while chasing David on his bicycle. And then I turned the corner, and with it, turned a page in my life. At the bus stop, I pulled out a small card from my wallet, a name printed in neat font, Walter Brenner, attorney at law. George and I had used him years ago to finalize our will. I remembered how kindly he had spoken to me after George passed. If you ever need help, you call me, he'd said, and slipped this card into my hand. I dialed. Walter Brenner speaking. It's Martha Lewis. Pause. Martha, good Lord, how are you? I need your help. And that was all I needed to say. By 10 a.m., I was sitting across from him in his office. He looked older, like me, but his voice hadn't lost its strength. I pulled out the deed from my bag, placed it on the desk, and told him everything. The forged papers, the threats, the letter. David's voice saying, "Get out or I'll call the police." Walter leaned back, silent for a moment. Then he looked at me. You own that house, Martha. Full rights. You're not a guest. You're the landlord. They're the ones who should be worried. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. He explained my options. We could file a formal eviction notice, terminate any assumed tenancy, freeze any further actions David might attempt using my forged signature. I listened carefully, nodding. Then he said something that made me sit up straighter. You don't have to go back to that house, Martha. We can handle everything from here. It was like someone had unchained me. Later that afternoon, I made another call. Jessica Tran speaking. Jessica had helped my neighbor sell her house last year. Professional, discreet, and, according to Mrs. Harris, fierce as hell when needed. Jessica, this is Martha Lewis. I'd like to discuss listing a property. The pause on her end was brief, but her tone changed instantly. Of course, is now a good time to talk? We met at a quiet cafe. I handed her the documents Walter had reviewed. She glanced through them, then looked at me with curiosity. You sure about this? It's a big move. I smiled. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. She tapped her pen against her notebook. We'll sell it, fast, clean, on your terms. We set the price. Not too high. I wasn't looking for profit. I was looking for closure. I told her I wanted to choose the buyer personally. I didn't want the house falling into the hands of someone who would use it the same way David had. Jessica nodded. I've got a few clients in mind. One of them is a single woman, recently divorced. Looking to start over. Reminds me a bit of you. That made me smile, because maybe it wasn't just about reclaiming what I'd lost. Maybe it was about passing something on, intentionally this time. That evening, I checked into a small apartment downtown. It was modest but clean. A window with a view of the river, a kitchenette, a bed that didn't creak when I sat on it. I stood there for a moment, just breathing. No shouting, no footsteps walking past like I was invisible. No guilt hanging in the air like stale smoke. I opened the window. The city buzzed below me, alive, indifferent, real. And I whispered, I'm not done yet. Because I wasn't. This wasn't exile. It was emancipation. 3 weeks had passed since I walked out of my old house. And in those 3 weeks, I didn't once look back. Not because I didn't feel anything, but because what I felt, finally, was freedom. Freedom from shame, from walking on eggshells, from hoping someone would treat me with kindness they no longer cared to give. Instead, I walked into a version of myself I thought was long gone. A woman who made decisions, who signed her own name, and this time didn't hand it over to anyone else. Jessica Tran moved quickly. After our first meeting, she arranged everything with the precision of a scalpel. The house was appraised, photographed, listed, all within days. But I'd made one thing clear. I want to choose who it goes to. This house deserves someone who respects it. And what it costs to build. Jessica nodded, eyes sharp with understanding. And that's how I met Diane, a retired teacher, soft-spoken, divorced after 32 years of marriage. She walked through each room of my former home like it was a church, quiet, reverent. In the kitchen, she stood still, ran her hand over the countertop, and said, "This feels like a place I could belong, without asking permission to exist." I didn't say anything at first, but in that moment I saw myself, not the woman who had fled in silence, but the one who was now in charge of what stayed and what ended. I turned to her. "Then it's yours." Jessica smiled. The papers were signed 3 days later. On the morning of the final closing, I sat in Jessica's office and slipped a thick white envelope into a stamped manila one. Inside, a notarized copy of the new deed, a termination of occupancy letter, and a short, typed note. "You asked me to leave. Now I'm simply completing the transaction." No emotion, no insult, just facts. I handed it to Jessica. "Send it certified. Let him sign for it." She nodded, and that was it. No dramatic confrontation, no screaming match in the driveway. No begging, no pleading, just law, just truth, and the cold elegance of boundaries finally drawn. That night, I brewed a cup of tea in my quiet little kitchen. The new apartment was nothing grand, but it was mine. Every drawer held only what I needed. No junk, no clutter, no tension. As I sat down by the window, the city below hummed, 1,000 stories happening at once. I wasn't part of anyone else's anymore. just my own. Then the phone rang, unknown number. I let it buzz twice before answering. Mom? David. His voice cracked like glass, breathless, shaken. I got the letter. What is this? Are you serious? I took a sip of tea before answering. It's done. You can't just sell the house. I didn't just sell it, I said. I sold it legally, thoughtfully, and peacefully. He paused, then came the guilt tactics. Where are we supposed to go? Sarah's 7 months pregnant. We have a child. You really want to do this to your own family? I looked out at the river, calm, silver, undisturbed. David, I was part of this family, until you forged my name and threatened to call the police on me. You made it clear I was no longer welcome. I'm simply honoring that. This isn't fair, he barked. Neither was turning your mother into a stranger in her own home. He didn't speak after that, only breathing, fast, panicked, then a click. The call ended. I didn't feel victory. I didn't feel vengeance. I felt something better, relief, like a wound that finally scabbed over, like silence that no longer meant being ignored, but being at peace. 3 days later, Diane moved in. Jessica texted me, "It's done. New owners happy, old occupants gone, no resistance." I reread the message twice. Then, for the first time in over a year, I opened the small box at the back of my closet. Inside, a picture of George, a faded scarf he bought me, and a letter he once wrote. If you ever feel lost, listen for your own voice. It will always bring you home. I sat by the window, eyes wet but smiling, because now I was home, and the voice I heard was mine. The day he came back, I was trimming the lavender on my balcony. The sun had just begun to soften, spilling amber light over the rooftops. I could hear the distant hum of weekend traffic, children laughing in the park across the street. It was a peaceful day, a day I had made mine. No interruptions, no expectations, just quiet, and me. I was sipping warm tea when the knock came. 3 soft taps, then silence, then one more. Hesitant, almost apologetic. I didn't move right away. I waited, staring at the door. I already knew who it was. I walked to the peephole, calm and slow. It was David. His face looked older, not in years, but in weight. The kind of aging that comes from realizing too late what you've broken. He wore the same coat he used to wear in college. It hung off him now like it didn't belong anymore. In his hands, a small framed photo. From where I stood, I couldn't see which one, but I could guess. He shifted from foot to foot, then finally spoke. "Mom, I know you're there." I said nothing. "I'm sorry." His voice cracked. "I didn't mean for things to go this far. I was scared. I thought I was doing what was best for everyone." He looked down, then back up toward my window. "But I was wrong. About everything. About you." Still, I said nothing, because silence now was not a wall, but a boundary. "I've been coming here for 3 days," he continued. "I didn't know what to say. I still don't." He stepped back, held up the photo. "Do you remember this?" It was the picture of us on the porch, me holding David when he was maybe 5, George behind us, arms wrapped around both. A perfect moment frozen in time, before anything cracked, before anything was taken for granted. "I miss this," David said. "I miss you." Still, I didn't open the door, because missing someone is not the same as respecting them. He sat down on the steps, his shoulders sagged under the weight of his own choices. I walked to the window, pulled the curtain just a little to the side. He didn't see me, but I saw him, and I saw the boy I once rocked to sleep, the teenager who slammed doors, the man who tried to erase me. And I saw something else, A woman who no longer needed his validation. Not because I didn't care, but because I had learned to care for myself more. He stayed there for a while, head in hands, and then, slowly, he rose, looked at the door one last time, and walked away. I didn't cry. I didn't chase after him. I didn't hope he'd come back with the right words next time, because this wasn't a story about being rescued. It was a story about being reborn. I stood in the quiet living room for a long moment, then sat down at my writing desk. I took out a fresh page from my journal and wrote, "Today my son came back. He brought an apology. I didn't open the door. I didn't need to, because I am already home." I closed the journal and placed it next to a small photo of George, the same one I'd taken from the old house, the only one I needed. Outside, the sky turned a gentle lavender gray. I brewed another pot of tea, lit a small candle, put on an old jazz record George loved. And as the music filled the apartment, soft and steady, I smiled. Not because everything was perfect, not because the past had been fixed, but because finally I was no longer part of someone else's silence. I was the author of my own.